Tonight's story begins with a leap from a 30-story roof, a young woman choosing to end her life quietly in an abandoned part of the city. But she never hits the ground. Suspended in midair, invisible to passersby, she is told only one thing by the grinning man in the window. You have to eat. Each bite she takes of herself lowers her closer to freedom, or to something much worse waiting below. This is not a jump, it's a hunger the building won't let go. Welcome to Nightmare Proof, where true horror comes alive. Here, you'll hear real stories of the strange, the disturbing, and the unexplainable. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to face the darkness. I never hit the ground. I remember how cold it was that night. I wished I had brought a thicker jacket, then realized how silly that was. Temperature was one of the few things I could still feel. Love, joy, anger, desire, interest, they'd all gradually faded away. I chose a building in an empty part of the city. I didn't want a group of people gathered around my body. I wanted someone to stumble across me, then call someone to pick me up. Leave the way I always wanted to live, as the least amount of a burden as I could. The building was 30 stories tall. I researched that 5 stories were high enough to kill someone, but I wanted to be sure. My grandpa always told me this part of town was once bustling. It used to be home to hundreds of businesses, many schools, and several of the city's most stunning parks. Ever since I've been alive, though, it has been known as the Wasteland. 20 blocks of abandoned buildings and cracked roads that the city stopped caring about a long time ago. I took a deep breath as I stared out. I saw the bright city skyline that seemed so far from this place. I looked down at the thin sidewalk below, wondering how long it would take for someone to find me. I thought about my mom, my only friend, Millie, and my cat, Winston. I knew they'd be fine without me, better even. I closed my eyes and jumped. As soon as I stepped off, I realized I'd made a mistake. Everything that worried me seemed so menial, and I couldn't believe I'd made such a stupid choice. My parents would be ruined. My cat would wonder where I was. Millie would be alone to deal with all the bullshit high school stuff that seemed to matter so much 1 second ago. But there was no turning back. It felt like hitting concrete, but that's not what happened. I opened my eyes and saw the sidewalk below. It was still so far down. I looked up and could see the spot where I jumped, only a few yards above me. I wondered if I'd landed on a fire escape. I looked directly under my body, but saw nothing holding me in the air. To my side, the building sat a few feet away, just out of reach. I racked my brain for an explanation as to what was happening. A wind force that was holding me in place in the air? No, it felt like I was on something stiff, as if an invisible box was holding most of my body in place. I could still move my arms and head, though. Had I died, and this was a weird afterlife? I didn't rule it out, but my body still felt alive, and I never believed in that sort of thing. I was banking on there being nothing after I died. For the next few hours, I hung there in the air, hoping someone would walk by and notice the floating body. I tried grasping the side of the building, but my fingers wouldn't reach. I dropped my head and noticed a light turn on, a few floors below. "Hey!" I screamed. No one came to the window, so I screamed again. Still, no response. I took a deep breath and screamed as loudly as I could. "Please, I need help!" A few seconds went by, and the light turned off. "Hey!" I cried. I called several more times, but the light never came back on. Hours passed. The streetlights below turned off as the sun started to rise. I'd spent the first of many nights in the sky. Day 3. My stomach clenched with hunger, and my mouth was dry with thirst. There was no question that I was still alive. This also presented the issue of having to use the bathroom. I couldn't pull my pants down far enough due to the inability to twist my lower body. I held my piss for as long as I could, but had already gone twice in my pants and was trying to avoid a third time. Tears filled my eyes as I pissed myself, turning me into some kind of fucked up cloud. I wished I could go back to 2 nights ago, stop myself from writing that letter, from getting on that bus, from breaking into this ugly building and climbing the 30 stories to the roof. My legs still ached from the climb. I looked down and noticed someone staring up at me. At least, it looked like they were. I didn't know how long they'd been staring, but it didn't matter. I waved frantically and yelled into the air. Despite knowing they wouldn't be able to hear me, they continued to stare for several minutes. I could tell it was a man, but couldn't see any distinguishing features. He stood still, like he was made from stone, as I continued desperately to call for help. His demeanor made me more uncomfortable than I already was. I finally gave up, after what felt like an hour. He stared the whole time, standing completely still. When I stopped, he looked away, then continued down the sidewalk. Day 7. It rained a few days ago, and I was able to catch some in my mouth. The way my body craved food and water, there was little doubt that I was still alive, if barely. I was so fucking hungry. It went beyond craving the taste of food. I could feel my body eating itself. I tried catching bugs out of the air, and caught a few flies and gnats here and there, but I knew it wasn't enough to keep me alive. The parts of my skin exposed to the sun were dry and as red as a fresh tomato. On the exposed space between my pants and shoes, my skin had grown large, yellow blisters that felt like tiny balls of fire. I resigned to the fact that no one could see me. Every time someone approached, I'd use what little spit I had left and let it fall from my mouth to the ground below. I missed most of the time, but there were at least 3 times my spit landed right in front of the person, and one guy I'm pretty sure I nailed on the head. None of them even slowed down. One man stopped and looked up. I excitedly waved my arms, but he continued on, not reacting to my pleas for help. Maybe this was all some fucked up dream, and I'd wake up in my bed with Winston on my chest. I closed my eyes, hoping I was right. A sound woke me. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Even my eyes were tired, and they strained to look from place to place. They focused on a window several stories down, with a blurry figure hanging outside. I wondered if it was the window with the light on the other night. I could tell the figure was a man, but my vision was blurry. As my eyes began to focus, I noticed something wrong with the way the man looked. He looked almost like your average balding man in his late 40 seconds to early 50 seconds, but his features were too close together. He had dark irises, like he'd been doing a lot of drugs, and wore a smile that showed all his teeth. His teeth were larger than any person's I'd ever seen. I wondered if they were fake. "Hell, help," I said weakly. The man started to shake, like he had some neurological disorder. A sound came from him that I couldn't figure out at first, but quickly realized he was laughing. It was a soft giggle, like a cartoon might do after playing a prank. I said, "I need help," I said, as loud as I could, which was a little louder than a normal whisper. He continued to laugh. I dropped my head, resigned to the fact that this man was some horrible figment of my imagination. He went silent, so I looked back at him. He wore a smile, but was standing perfectly still. I watched him for several seconds and was about to say something when he opened his sick mouth. "You have to eat," he said in a high-pitched voice, like he was trying to mimic a woman's voice. What? I replied. He didn't say anything for several minutes, and I was unable to take my eyes off him. "You will eat," he said before disappearing back into the window. Day 18. I shouldn't still be alive, I thought. However, my body continued to react, as one normally would in my condition. My skin was on fire due to the constant sun exposure. Peeling skin and blisters were more prevalent than normal skin on the exposed parts of my body. On some days, it felt like the heat from the sun might cook me like a rotisserie chicken. I smelled horrible, both from days without showering and the collection of waste inside my pants. Every time I caught a whiff, I gagged, but of course, I had nothing to vomit. Luckily, without hardly anything to eat or drink, I hadn't used the bathroom in almost a week. I guessed I should be weirdly thankful for the smell, as it attracted flies I could routinely catch and eat. But it wasn't enough to satisfy my continuously growing hunger. It was a hunger I can't describe. I'd moved past craving meals I normally ate and was craving meat in general, like my body knew I was in desperate need of protein. Day 31. My head hung to the ground. I no longer had the strength to lift it to look around, and didn't see the point in it, really. This is where I was going to die, if I could die. My hunger went from a pain in my stomach to a primal surge through me to consume anything I could. The bugs learned to stop coming around me. They stayed just out of reach on my lower half. It hasn't rained in almost a week. My lips were so chapped that every time I opened my mouth, I could feel flakes of skin peeling away. It was the same for the dry spots on my skin. I heard a familiar sound that made my eyes widen, despite barely having the strength to do so. It was the man laughing. He was only a few floors below, hanging from a window. He cackled like a hyena while staring up at me with pale eyes. "Fuck you," I said, the inside of my throat sore and swollen. "You're not real." He stopped laughing, but left his mouth hanging open, frozen in place. He remained still as a statue for several seconds. My heartbeat increased as I waited for him to move, to speak, to do anything. His mouth closed slowly, and his eyes pointed at me without moving his head. "You have to eat," he said in a low, gravely voice, as if he'd been gargling with rocks. He slunk back into the window, but I never saw him leave the building. I stared in a daze at the window for hours, waiting for him to come back. He made it sound like there was something I could eat. My clothes? They were the only things I could grab. I reached towards my shirt and noticed the dry, cracked skin on my fingers. They looked almost as though they'd been fried in oil. Day 43. I remembered seeing on a TV show that humans can survive around a month without food. Granted, they have access to water. Without water, a human can only survive about a week. I'd surpassed that in spades. I couldn't believe my body was still pumping blood through my veins, still filling my lungs with air. I wanted to be dead, but not for the same reasons I was on the roof in the first place. My clothes draped over my body, and my skin was tight against my bones. My tits were hardly there before, but were almost completely gone. The smell coming from my pants would have made me sick if I had anything in my stomach to throw up. I'd been chewing on my shirt, but it did nothing to stop the pain in my stomach. I craved every food I'd ever had, even the ones I hated. Brussels sprouts, cherry tomatoes, grandma's vegetable casserole. But what I craved more than anything was meat. My body knew I needed protein more than anything else, and the thought consumed me. Every person who passed by looked like a potential meal. I lost myself every time I saw someone, scratching and clawing to try and reach them. My fingernails started to peel, coming off like a Band-Aid that had been there for too long. I finished peeling it and stared at the nail. I didn't think long before putting it in my mouth and chewing. The nail danced in my mouth, not giving way to the weak state of my teeth. A piece eventually snapped off, breaking it in two. I swallowed. I dropped my head in shame, but the feeling of having something go down my throat and into my stomach was something I never thought I'd miss so much. I paused before moving to my next fingernail. Then another, and another. It took me almost all day to finish my nails. I looked over and noticed the spot between the bricks I'd been staring at had moved. It was a little higher. I was falling. Day 44. After the fingernails, I thought about what else I could eat. The only parts of me I could reach were my arms and hands. I wasn't sure my teeth were strong enough to tear through the flesh, and I wasn't sure I could take the pain. I pulled a few strands of hair from my head and swallowed. They tickled my throat while traveling down. I waited for a moment, but I didn't appear to have moved. "Fuck," I said to myself. I pulled out several more strands of hair, cringing with each one. I threw them into my mouth like a handful of noodles and swallowed. Still, nothing. "Fuck," I cried, anger filling my veins. I grabbed a fistful of my hair and pulled. I felt the root of every strand break from my skin. I held the hair in front of me, seeing drops of blood decorating a few of the strands. I stuffed all the hair in my mouth. The clump got stuck in the back of my throat, making me realize the mistake I'd made. I reached into my mouth and pulled out the clump, swallowing it in small chunks instead. I put the last bit in my mouth. It went down slowly and scratched the edges of my throat. It stuck in the middle of my throat, and I wanted to come back up. I closed my eyes and swallowed, forcing it the rest of the way down. I opened my eyes and saw I was a floor lower. I smiled and took a break to allow the pain in my scalp to settle before grabbing another chunk. Day 50. Most of my hair was gone, as was the flesh on top of my right hand. It hurt like hell, and I was pretty sure an infection had started around the teeth marks. However, I made it to the 15th floor. "I told you you would eat," he said. He was hanging outside the window beside me, smiling his wide smile. "Why are you doing this to me?" I asked. "I'm not," he said with a giggle. "Who is?" I asked. "And don't say it's me, and this is some fucked lesson from God." "Oh no," he said. "Not you at all." He paused before looking up towards the roof, then down at the sidewalk. "This place was once owned by horrible men," he said with a laugh. "Horrible men, who did horrible, horrible things to men, women, children, animals." He paused. "And like nicotine from cigarettes, the evil, it stained the walls, absorbed into them." I lowered my head, trying to comprehend what the man was saying. I had so many questions, but the only one that came out was, "Why me?" "You offended it," he said, his smile growing wider. "So now, you have to appease it." Day 61. My fingers were gone. My lips were barely there. I was only on the 10th story. I'd been staring at the building. Since hearing the strange man's explanation, I could feel something off about the building. There was an essence coming from it. Something wrong. But what did it matter? Whatever this thing was, it wanted me to eat myself, completely. "It's enough!" I screamed. "I can't keep going." I knew what it must want. It wanted me to eat my eyes, my nose, all the skin and musculature from my arms and chest. The strange man poked his head out of the closest window. I dropped my head in exhaustion. "You have to keep eating," he said. "Fuck you," I returned. It was the first time I saw the man stop smiling. He looked like a child about to cry. He stayed for a few more seconds, then slid back inside. Day 67, I did what I said I would. I stopped eating anything from my body, despite the cravings for protein. I didn't care how long it took. I was going to let myself waste away. Eventually, my skin had to rot and get taken away by flies. Birds would take my organs, and my bones would waste away. I dropped my head, hoping I could pass out for a little while. I heard a familiar voice, but it wasn't the strange man. I looked up and saw my mom leaning over the side of the building. My heart jumped, and my eyes opened wider than they ever had. She leaned back, and I saw another figure. It was a police officer. I tried to hear what they were saying, but could only catch a word here and there. "CCTV, the officer said. Jumped, body missing. The only thing I heard from my mom was sobs. I'd never heard her cry like that, even after my grandma died. There was a pain in her cries that made me feel worse for her than I did for myself. My mom was there for a long time, even with the officer trying to get her to move. She kept looking in my direction, as if she saw me, but I kept disappearing. If I thought there was any chance she heard me, I would have screamed, 'I love you,' and 'I'm sorry.' I saw the officer pull her away, leaving me alone again. I stared at the side of the building, looking at the cracks and water stains, all the bird shit and missing paint. I was sick of looking at it and angry that I had to. 'Fuck you, you haunted bitch,' I screamed, with all my weak throat would allow. 'I never did anything to anyone. I offended you? By what? Feeling lonely and sad?' I said weakly. 'Fuck you. I'm not eating anymore.' It rained that night, so I was able to drink. It felt nice to have something in my belly besides flies and the lingering pieces of my body. I almost vomited from being unable to stop myself from drinking, but I managed to keep it down. I was about to fall asleep when I heard something cut through the sound of the rain. It was a voice. My mom's voice. 'Kara!' she cried. I raised my head and saw her hanging out of the window right beside me. She was looking right at me. "Mom," I cried. "You can see me? You keep going in and out," she yelled. "Kara, what's going on?" I wanted to tell her everything I'd been through over the last few months. Mostly, I wanted to tell her how sorry I was. I reached my arm towards her, and she did the same. I was still a bit too high. I looked at the pale flesh of my bicep and sighed. I took a bite. My mom screamed as I pulled a chunk of meat away with my teeth. It was chewy, and I was barely able to stay awake through the pain. I chewed and swallowed, allowing me to drop a few inches. My mom grabbed my hand and pulled. I felt the air dislodge around my body. I hit the edge of the building hard and thought my shoulder had dislocated. My mom strained to pull me into the window, but didn't stop trying. She pulled and pulled until I finally fell through the window on the floor beside her. In under a second, she had me wrapped in her arms. I thought she'd be disgusted by the way I looked, that she would push me away after she smelled me, but she refused to let me go. For several moments, we sat there. It didn't feel real, just like when I jumped and didn't hit the ground. A slight shake in the floor brought me back to reality. I looked around and noticed all the dark stains on the walls. Some were from water and mold, but others were almost black and splattered, violently. I felt a buzz over my entire body. "Let's go, Mom," I said. I tried to stand, but my legs shook before quickly giving in. I almost fell, but my mom caught me. She draped me over her shoulder, and I tried to move with her, but my feet refused to find footing. It began to feel impossible to leave the confines of the building without some extra help. But before I mentioned it, my mom grabbed my arms and pulled my body onto her back. She moved her thin legs slowly towards the door. We entered the hallway, and she picked up speed. It was amazing, as she was only a bit bigger than me. I began to believe that myth about mothers having superhuman strength when their kids were in trouble had some truth to it. A low, loud groan came from the walls as the ceiling dropped small pieces of debris on us. The building was angry, and I worried it would refuse to let us leave. My mom didn't stop, though, even after we entered the stairwell, and she had to carry me down the steep stairs. The building shook again, almost sending me and my mom falling to the bottom of a stair set, but she managed to regain her footing without dropping me. My feet dragged along the floor as we continued down one stair set, then another, all while the building continuously shook, growing more and more violent with every passing minute. By the time we reached the bottom floor, the buzz in my body felt like thousands of hornets under my skin, trying to break free. I pulled my hands from my mom's to cover my ears, as if doing so would help. I fell to the floor and pressed my hands against my ears. It felt like someone was going at my skull with a drill. The low, loud groan continued to bellow as tears filled my eyes. I realized the building wasn't going to let me leave. If I tried to step outside, it would kill me. I'd never see my family or friends again. The thought made me scream, but it was drowned out by the droning groan from the building. My body started to move, and I saw it was my mom dragging me to the door. She had tears in her eyes as she strained to get me to the door. "Stop!" I cried. "It's going to kill me!" But she wouldn't, and I didn't have the strength to fight her. I closed my eyes as the buzzing continued, and the groaning grew louder and louder. My vision went black, and everything became silent. I felt rain hit my face and opened my eyes. I was on the sidewalk outside the building, staring into the sky. My mom put her arms around me and held me tightly. I heard her crying, but continued staring at the sky, specifically at the spot where I'd spent the last 2 months. It looked so far away. When I finally dropped my eyes, I saw the strange man standing in the lobby. He was waving at me, waving for me to come back in. But as my mom held me in place, I didn't even consider it. Thank you for watching Nightmare Proof. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to keep the nightmares alive. Have a story of your own? Send it in, and you may hear it here next time. Until then, sleep well if you can.